I am so thrilled that Camila Gramkow is joining us today to talk about public investment for climate and social goals. Camila is going to talk to us today in just a minute. First, I will introduce her and the basic idea behind the speaker series. This semester is the kind of launch of the Political Economy of Climate Change program at BESI, the Berkeley Economy and Society Initiative. This is one of a number of political economy centers that have been set up around the country, largely thanks to the Hewlett Foundation. So it's a very kind of exciting time for political economy in general. Thanks. Camila is our second speaker. Our prior speaker, Brett Christophers, talked about the fundamental problems with the private sector's approach to renewable energy development and made the case that the private sector was not going to be able to develop renewables at scale without far more dramatic public investment. Today, we're going to hear from Camila Gramkow about the case of Brazil and Latin America more broadly and debates there about public-private participation, partnership, and what the state can do to get the most inclusive and most dramatic environmental policies passed. And a note that next week on April 30th, we'll be hearing from Saleh Omarova, a professor of law at Cornell, on her increasingly well-known proposals for far more dramatic public finance in the space of green technology, green infrastructure, and renewable energy. Camila Gramkow is the interim director of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, the Brazil office, where she leads debates on climate and economic development policy in Brazil and across Latin America. She has experience with project management. There's many things in her bio, but I'm actually just going to skip and say, basically, Camila has been leading the debate on the idea of a big push for development in Latin America, building on the work of Raul Prebisch and the long-time work of ECLAC as a kind of center of Latin American economic thought and developmentalism. And I know that Camila's ideas have been extremely influential in Brasilia. And personally, from my point of view, although there is no such thing as a perfect government, the democratic governments of Latin America, I think, offer the best hope for dramatic climate action, and in particular, climate leadership from the global south. And that's climate leadership that's informed and pressured from below, which is not the case in other countries. So this is, to me, really a great source of hope and excitement. Camila's work has been at the center of all of that. And I'm just really thrilled to hear from her on what she's been thinking about and what she sees happening. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Camila, to talk for around 35, 40 minutes. We'll get a Q&A, and just really thrilled to have you here at Berkeley on the screen, where we are, we're using a quote-unquote green technology to facilitate dialogue across borders. Okay.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you again for the invitation and for the kind words. This is probably the most carbon neutral way to participate in this debate. So it's good that technology helps us to be together yet far away. I'll be sharing some slides with you. I hope that you'll be able to see them correctly. If not, please let me know. So, as Daniel was mentioning, we have been working at CEPAL, which is the Spanish and Portuguese acronym for the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. The idea of the big push is quite simple, and this is one of the beauties and one of the reasons why I like this approach so much. So I will be introducing the idea, the concept of the big push, and discussing some perspectives about the likelihood or the scenarios in which a big push for a transformative, productive, inclusive, and sustainable future could be built in Brazil and in other Latin American countries. The point of departure of this debate, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the IPCC scientific base for climate change, but this is the challenge ahead of us, right? We are talking about limiting global warming. The ideal scenario that is in front of us, the small window of opportunity that we still have, is limiting global warming of up to 1.5 degrees. But then the next window would be the 2 degree, And we are, if we look at the implemented policies, we are in a scenario that is far beyond that. We really need to be reducing emissions at much faster pace. But I want to draw your attention to this graph, to the fact that the scale or the magnitude of the transformation that is required to limit warming, be it 1.5, be it 2, be it 3, be it 5, be it whatever level we are discussing, it will be necessary to decarbonize economies worldwide completely. We, as humanity, will need to achieve net zero emissions. And if we were to achieve 1.5 degrees, we will need to achieve the net decarbonization by 2050. If we are to achieve the 2-degree limit, we are to achieve that by 2100, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter the degree or the level of warming that we are willing to accept. The point and the fact is that net zero emissions will be needed to be met at some point in time if we are to stabilize warming and securing human existence. And so this is the first point. It's a structural, it's a deep cross-cutting transformation that we're talking about when we're talking about decarbonization. But you recall, and Daniel was also mentioning at the beginning, Ro Prebisch was one of the founding fathers of CEPAL's economic thinking, and he has this phrase in a very old article that is older than me, older than Daniel, and surely older than all of you. It's a text from the year 1980, where he says that with regards to the environmental crisis, we're not facing new problems, but old problems that have become more serious. This is our first cue to the debate on climate justice. And when we talk about the climate crisis, it's one of those crises that aggravates or exacerbates development gaps that Latin American and more widely peripheral or developing economies already face. It will aggravate poverty, it will aggravate external dependency, debt, and many other issues that these countries already face. If we look at the case of Brazil, it is a country that depends significantly and ever more on agricultural commodities to achieve trade balance. And the main crops that will suffer from global warming in Brazil are precisely soybean, which is the number one agricultural commodity in our export basket, but also manioc, rice, coffee, and other important items. On the other hand, with regards to poverty, we see that the vulnerable communities that are sitting in vulnerable areas, for instance, areas subjected to landslides, such as the favelas, or areas subject to floodings by the river basins, these are usually the poorest communities, and these are the ones that will also suffer more dramatically from the impacts of climate change. So this is just perhaps, it's not eco-terrorism, but it's really eco-science, I would say, that tells us that not facing global warming is not neutral. Not facing global warming does not mean that society, the economy will remain as it is, but it actually means that the problems will become more severe. So what can we do about it? Here's where we come to the global context, which is one I will go a bit fast on this point because I really want to get to our big push. We can see that many countries in the world are adopting green recovery strategies from developing to developed economies. This is an emerging trend or a characteristic of the policies worldwide. And just to bring closer attention to perhaps a couple of the most important ones, or the ones that we have been following more closely, which is the case of the US with the Build Back Better framework and all the trillions and billions of green stimulus that have been announced as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the famous Inflation Reduction Act. We can see here that the US government is directing perhaps the largest ever amount of public resources to the sustainable agenda. And likewise in the European Union, the European New Deal, and then after the pandemic, the reinforcements that came with the Next Generation EU have similar focus to help decarbonize the economy while promoting the recovery and the growth of the economy. What these examples illustrate us is a paradigmatic change in which we're not asking anymore if climate change is real, if it's man-made or not, but we are starting to ask ourselves, what is the best course of action? And for the first time ever, climate policy has been presented as a driver of economic growth and not anymore as an obstacle. And it is in this context that CEPAL develops the idea or the approach of the big push for sustainability. This is an approach that was designed from Latin American and Caribbean countries to Latin American and Caribbean countries to help those countries transform structurally their models or their styles of development. And I'm gonna start by talking or presenting the three-gap model, which is the analytical or the conceptual basis of the big push for sustainability. The idea of the three-gap model is very simple. It departs from the three gaps in the development model. So we're talking about the three gaps, which are the economic gap, the social gap, and the environmental gap. So it's a very simple idea. We are trying to focus on these three dimensions of development to identify the convergences. What are the roads or the trajectories that can lead us to a converging development model in the sense that it delivers benefits in these three dimensions. So I will go through the three rates of growth, but I really don't want to get lost in the mathematical in the equations here, but I really want to convey the intuition behind the model so that we can jump straight to our applications of this theoretical grounding to the big push. So the first idea relates to the economic dimension. In the case of Latin American and Caribbean countries, the single variable that has impeded a larger economic growth is the external sector. These are countries that present trade deficits that imply a limit, an external constraint to economic growth. And what this simple equation here tells us is that peripheral economies such as Brazil and other Latin American and Caribbean countries, the rate of economic growth of the periphery depends on the rate of growth of the center economies. These countries have very limited margin, if any margin at all, to determine their rate of economic growth. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but the idea is that the products in which the peripheral countries specialize, they are less diverse and they are less technologically intensive. And I want to illustrate why this is a problem in comparison with center economies where the specialization is the opposite. It's more diversified and it's more technologically intensive and complex. So let's just depart from an individual example. Assume that you yourself as an individual, you have an increase in your income, right? You have more income to spend. Of course, you will spend some of that additional income in some low-tech, low technologically complex goods, such as more tomatoes, more fruits, more agricultural crops. But the more and more your income increases, it is more likely that a larger share of that increase will be spent on technologically more sophisticated products. So there's only so much tomatoes you can consume. There's only so much juice, I don't know, cookies you can consume. But our demand for technologically intensive goods is relatively infinite. We always want a new version of the iPhone. We always want an updated version of a television and some other gadgets that we don't know right now, but in the future, all of us will be using. So when at the country level, if we bring this discussion to a country level, as the total income of the world increases, the demand for those products that the periphery specializes in increases less than the demand for the products that the center specializes in. So this is what imposes a limit. The amount that is spent in the distribution of the trade on the goods that the peripheral economy specialize in is increasingly small, and that puts in a ceiling, an economic ceiling for growth itself because of the economic structure. Now, moving on to the social dimension, we estimate, again, a very simple model here. We estimate what will be the necessary growth rate to reduce inequality and eradicate poverty. So what will be the minimum rate of growth for creating formal employment, strengthening the labor movement and wage bargaining, and financing universal social protection? So we estimate what will be that minimum level of growth that would be necessary to close the social gap. And finally, in the environmental dimension, we estimate the growth rate that would be consistent with environmental sustainability. Given the current technologies, what would be the maximum rate of growth that would be compatible with the decarbonization objectives? And this leads us to this graph. Again, I don't want to spend too much time here on these technicalities. You can see the details in the paper later on, but let me just highlight some aspects of this graph here that are important. So in the horizontal axis, you can see the center growth rate, right? This is the economic growth rate in the center countries. And in the vertical axis, you can see the economic growth rate in the peripheral economies. So in this example, for a given rate of growth in the center economies, we have very different economic growth rates depending on the dimension that we're looking at. YT is the trade compatible economic growth. So this here in the point B would be the maximum rate of growth that peripheral countries can achieve without imbalancing their trade even more, their trade balance even more. The environmental growth rate limit would be right here, so it would be less than the actual observed economic growth rates, and the social gap would be this one, would be the rate of growth that would be necessary to reduce or to eradicate completely. So what we can see here, and this is, I don't want to worry too much about the scope and the exact values, but the message here is that these three dimensions are not converging. The growth rates that would be required to reduce the gap in each of the three dimensions would be different. So this means that we need to be shifting those curves and understanding what would be the conditions to actually, what are the policy conditions that are actually necessary to produce convergence. And this is the focus that I want to, what I want to focus on from here on out. So how to close the three gaps? It's really necessary to have a coordinated mix of policies simultaneously, a coordinated mix of industrial, environmental, and social policies. So for these three different growth rates to converge, we need to be talking about redistribution, the redistribution of income in order to reduce the growth rates that would be necessary without changing the social structure to eradicate poverty. We also need to have structural change so that we can generate more jobs in the economies internally, thereby increasing the YT, the capacity of generating those jobs. We need to talk about decarbonization, how to reduce the emissions of a given economy so that we can still meet the social objectives. And we need, of course, technical progress. So I just wanted to give you this very conceptual analytical framework before we move on to a more practical discussion. This framework it's very mathematical, it's very abstract in a way, but it gives us theoretical grounding for the whole proposal or the view of the big push for sustainability. And I want to, before moving on to the big push itself, I just want to acknowledge Gabriel Porcile, José Eduardo Latorre, and Martin Cherskaski, and João Romero for their support in helping us devise this theoretical framing of the big push debate. So now going into a more applied or hands-on idea, what is the big push for sustainability? How do we achieve those policies that I was just mentioning, structural transformation, decarbonization, and technical progress? The answer is one word: investment. There is no change without investment. You cannot change the economic model, the productive matrix without investments. It's impossible. So this is the core object of the big push for sustainability approach. It is a big push of transformative investments. So the first question that we ask ourselves is, what is the new development model that we want to build? What kind of investments are we talking about once we understand where we want to be in the future? And again, I will not be going into much details here, but we do offer some pillars for this new development styles, some ideas or shed light into what these new development styles are. But of course, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. This really depends on the national framing in question. The second or step or component of the big push is broad policy coordination. Without broad policy coordination, it will not be possible to mobilize the scale and the quality of the investments that are needed to transform the development style. And here we are talking really about coordination in a broad sense: national, subnational actions, measures, task, fiscal, regulatory planning. So it's really important to have a harmonized policy setting or policy framework so that these investments can be mobilized. And then the third pillar of the big push for sustainability is investments themselves. Once you have those that coordinated policy frameworks, you then be able to mobilize these investments. Of these investments that I want you to recall in the course of our discussion today. The first one is scale. The development model without substantial, massive scale of investments. And in the context of decarbonization, it will not be possible to decarbonize completely the economies without a substantial volume of investments in green sustainable technology. So scale at the one hand, and the second characteristic is complementarity. One of the beauties of the big push for sustainability theory, in my perspective, is the complementarity quality of those investments. To bring this to a real world example, the complementarity means that the overall framework or each single investment will only become feasible, financially feasible, if another investment is happening in another sector simultaneously. Let me illustrate with an example. The manufacturing industry, the investments of the manufacturing industry in electric vehicles will only become feasible if there are simultaneously investments in charging infrastructure, and vice versa. The investment in the charging infrastructure will only be feasible if manufacturing industry is investing also in electric vehicles. So this illustrates the matter of complementarity. It's not a minor, it's actually a major issue. This means that the composition of the investments need to be well thought through. Perhaps defining elements of the big push that I'll be discussing later on in more detail is the importance of the investments, not just in the, I would say, classic green sectors, and by classic I mean investments in renewables, investment in electric vehicles, investments in the bioeconomy, investments in the circular economy. Of course, all of those are necessary, but we also insist, or we also highlight the importance, especially from the perspective of peripheral countries, of investments in education and in capacity building. It is those investments in building capacities, in fostering productive development, that will link the green agenda to a social and economic development agenda as well, and I'll be discussing that in more detail soon. And once we have been able to mobilize this massive scale and complementarity of investments as impacts, we expect a new cycle of economic growth with income generation, with job creation, social inclusion, cutting down emissions of greenhouse gases, restoring natural capital, especially when we think about investments in reforestation, afforestation, and recovering degraded land, amongst others, increase in technological innovation capabilities, a better insertion in trade, right, as we move up towards more sophisticated goods, which is a direction or a route of a change in development styles. We have identified at CEPAL 14 different strategic areas or missions for the big push for sustainability. These are areas that are strategic in the sense that they bear potential to reduce gaps in those three dimensions that I was just mentioning. One thing I want to draw attention from the beginning, and with this I want to illustrate that it's not just green investments or classic green investments per se that will drive social benefits, and I want to illustrate that with this example at hand. This graph shows the gender gap in the green jobs for the case of Brazil. So if we look here at the renewable energy sector, for instance, 11.7% of the jobs in this sector are occupied by women. If we look at forestry, production, and management, it's 14.9%. So in various of the sectors that are considered green, we can see that the vast majority of the jobs are occupied by males. And again, what I want to emphasize here is, of course, we need investments in this sector to happen, but the social benefits will not be spontaneous. It will not be automatic. We will need explicit policies in order to translate those environmental and economic benefits into social benefits as well. In the case, in the screen here, without an explicit gender inclusive, gender equality policy, we will not be able to reduce the gender gap, even with an ambitious green agenda. Put differently, the green agenda can be a driver of reducing the gender gap if it is associated with explicit policies to do that. It's one of the things I wanted to highlight. And a strategic area that I want to focus on in the minutes that we have left is the importance of innovation and productive development. This is vital when we think about Brazil, when we think about Latin America, and when we think about peripheral countries in general. And I want to illustrate that with evidence. What we are observing worldwide is an accelerated green technological race. If we look at this graph, the data for 30 years is that green patents grew. There are some countries that are appropriating the knowledge base of these technologies, which are essentially countries in the center.
Hi, Camila, you went on to mute for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, and I think you have to put the slides back.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened.
Oh, no worries.
Can you see it now?
Yep.
Fantastic. So, how does Brazil stand in the green technological race? Let me use the pointer again. So, what we see in the left-hand side graph is that in the world and in Brazil, there is an increasing share of the green patents in the total patents. This means that the share of the green is increasing in the total technology, right? And in the right-hand side graph, what we see is, looking only at green patents, what is the share of Brazil? And this is the message that we see on the screen. It's a very clear message. Brazil is falling behind along with other Latin American countries in the green technological race. And this is quite astonishing given the potential that Brazil and other Latin American countries present when we think about the bioeconomy, when we think about the potential of the Amazon, the biopharmaceuticals, biocosmetics. There's so much potential in Brazil and in other Latin American countries and this potential is not compatible with the trends that we observe. And if I can take one step further for in terms of what these findings tell us, these findings tell us that there is a concentration of the knowledge, of the know-how of how to do green technologies. This knowledge is concentrated in few countries. And this represents risks for developing countries such as Brazil. And let me again illustrate that with an example. If Brazil pursued a green transition tomorrow, and let's imagine a scenario in which a lot of public investment, public stimulus, fiscal stimulus, and efforts are put into green technologies. So everyone would be walking around in electric vehicles, electric buses, electric cars, motorcycles. Everyone would have solar panels in the rooftop of their houses. There would be significant investment also in renewable energy, in wind farms, in solar farms, in order to produce green electricity to support this massive increase in electricity demand. Let's assume that that happens. If we do not bear in mind where this technology is coming from, where these technologies are being produced, it would be a missed opportunity in terms of socioeconomic development. It is very likely that most of these goods and services would come from abroad. So we are talking about imported electric vehicles, imported batteries, imported solar panels, imported wind farms, etc., and so forth. So although we would have the fundamental environmental benefits, and I have to stress here that we are really talking about the sustainability of the human existence on this planet, it would mean a missed opportunity in terms of socioeconomic development, because it would increase the external dependency of peripheral economies and provoke a more uneven distribution of global trade. And let's recall why it is important to have a strong economic complexity, to have a strong knowledge base in the economy. We already know from evidence that there is a negative correspondence between the Gini index and the economic complexity index, which really means that more complex economies, those complex that are more productive, in which there is more knowledge and knowledge circulates more between the sectors, these economies tend to also be less socially uneven. And we explored the impact of economic complexity, or the relation between economic complexity and the environmental dimension. And we have shown that there is also a strong correlation here. We can see the more economically complex economies, the economies that present more productive, technological, and innovative capacities, also present better environmental performance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions by GDP, which is greenhouse gas emissions intensity, and also greenhouse gas per capita, right? So here what we understand, and the message we want to convey here, is that reducing emissions will only be possible at the level that we are that we have to achieve in order to decarbonize economies worldwide. Will require a lot of capacities, will require a lot of technological, innovative, and productive capacities. And this measure of this complexity of this capacity is exactly what is shown in this graph here. Those countries that have more capacities have also been able to reduce their environmental impact as well. And I want to finalize by bringing you some evidence and some scenarios that we have. We always have to go back to evidence, right? We, as an economic commission, our lab is the scenario world. We always have to go back to what the data and the evidence tell us that is possible or not possible, as we cannot test our hypothesis in the real world. I'll talk about the case of Brazil at the end. So we made a simulation of a reference scenario, which is a scenario characterized by business as usual. So a scenario in which the structural, economic, social, and environmental gaps of Latin American countries are reproduced. And in contrast, we devised a scenario of sustainable development policies, of big push for sustainability policies. We have used a model named E3ME. I will not go into much details. And in essence, what we did in the sustainable development policies was to simulate public investments, green stimulus, and regulations to drive investments in these strategic areas that are listed here. Don't worry, I will not go through the details of this table, but the policies are to drive investments in sustainable energy transition, sustainable mobility, bioeconomy, digital transformation, health, manufacturing industry, circular economy, and the care economy. And the results that we have obtained is that the right combination of policies can indeed unlock investments in these sectors. You can see at the top right-hand side the investment cycle increase, and this graph shows the results in relation to the baseline scenario. So when these policies are in place, they do provoke a new cycle of investments that accelerates GDP growth. Our estimates are by the year 2030. They also drive consumption and government spending, while reducing emissions by 35% by 2030, which is more ambitious than the current climate commitments presented by Latin American countries, and they also reduce all their local contaminants. And let me emphasize here some of the social indicators. These scenarios also show that there is an increase in jobs, but the increase in wages is faster than the increase in jobs. The increase in wages here is 7% by 2030 in comparison, which is twice as much to the increase in jobs. So this means that not only jobs are being created, but they are being created at higher pay than before. So what these results show again is that the right mix of investments and policies, they can address the three gaps simultaneously. We can close the socioeconomic and environmental gap simultaneously. And I have very few minutes now, but I just want to emphasize or perhaps tell you a bit more about the influence that this kind of modeling and perspective about climate justice, about how to achieve the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, how to build a green economy, you name the term that you feel more comfortable with, but how to translate the green agenda into a development agenda. And this, I would say, has been the core of our contribution to the Brazilian government. Brazil has devised an ecological transformation plan that, as the name says, is supposed to be transformative. It's not just a transition. The name was not picked by chance. We're really talking about structural change, a transformation in the direction of the ecological sustainability of the Brazilian economy. It is a plan that is being designed and implemented by the Brazilian Ministry of Finance. This is also different from most of the countries in which the green agenda is usually built by ministries of environment, ministries of energy, and in the case of Brazil, is really the Ministry of Finance taking the lead in coordination with various other ministries of this transformational agenda. And at the core of the ecological transformation plan of Brazil is the idea of technological density, the idea that it's not just about looking at green areas such as the bioeconomy, circular economy, but it's also about building capacities and using that agenda to then help build competitiveness, productivity, and also deliver social results as well. Another partner we have been working with closely with Brazil, again, under this conceptual view of the big push for sustainability, is the Ministry of Development, Industry and Trade, MEDIC. We have been working closely with MEDIC on devising a productive policy for the value chain of electric buses in Brazil. I'm not sure if you know, but Brazil has recently launched its new Green New Industrialization Plan, Nova Indústria Brasil, which is very much inspired by this kind of view and perspective as well. I could also mention other countries. Colombia is making significant, is presenting significant steps in this direction as well, with their reindustrialization policy, with their green fiscal policy initiatives, again, among others. But I will stop myself here because otherwise I keep talking on and on. I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that you are inspired as we are to pursue trajectories and routes that can really put developing and Latin American countries, and Brazil in particular, on a trajectory not only of decarbonization and environmental harmonization, but also of better income distribution, more jobs, more decent jobs, and so on. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much, Camila. Chuck, maybe we can just put Camila on the screen here. I want to just open it up. So thank you so much for this amazing talk. Let me open it up to questions. If you're on the Zoom, please just type any questions into the Q&A. And if you're in the room, I think Camila can hear us. Yeah, Mara. And maybe just introduce yourself before you ask it.
Hi, I'm Mara Loveman. I'm a professor in the sociology department and demography department here. Thank you so much for this really important work and this really interesting talk. I would like to hear you say a little bit about the political challenges, I'll call them, as opposed to obstacles to implementing this policy. So the beautiful thing about the economic simulations is you can assume a friendly policy environment and put whatever policies you would like and coordinate them however you'd like. And of course, the Brazilian landscape is not so simple. And so I'm just very interested to hear how, from your perspective, you think about the political landscape and the challenges and obstacles and what's movable and not, et cetera. So the politics.
Mm-hmm. Shall I answer now?
Oh, yes, please go ahead. Sorry, we're just playing with the video screen here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marla, for the very fundamental question. I remember when we were first developing the initial framework of the Big Push for Sustainability, and as you can see, coordination is vital. I think it was back in 2020, right, Daniel? I don't recall the exact year. And as you can tell, the policy or the political landscape was a very different one in Brazil. So we have been insisting, and indeed it will only be possible to mobilize the scale of the change we're talking about with coordination. And of course, this requires a significant amount of political will. The policy or the political landscape has improved significantly in the past few years, and we have observed that the environmental or the climate agenda has gained an unprecedented dimension in the current administration. I don't think that in any previous administrations in Brazil this theme had become so central. It was one of the central proposals of the president-elected, Mr. Lula da Silva. It is currently a priority at the Ministry of Finance. It is a priority of the Ministry of Development, Industry and Trade. But that does not mean that the political landscape is homogeneous or easy. Brazil still has a legislative power that is relatively conservative. And of course, many of the policies that we are talking about and recommending here will need to pass Congress. And even within the federal administration in Brazil, it still is missing an improved coordination mechanism. And here I'll be sharing my personal perspectives and not CEPAL's, but it would be ideal that these different plans, the Plano de Transformação Ecológica, the Nova Indústria Brasil, there is an upcoming circular economy plan, there is a bioeconomy strategy being designed. It's fundamental that there is a better coordination, even within governments and between government levels as well, between the federal and subnational governments, and even with civil society, productive sector, and the financing sector as well. So there are still many challenges ahead, but in my personal view, I can see that Brazil is striving or is really committed to give an example. And I'm saying this because Brazil is currently in the presidency of the G20. It was recently in the presidency of the BRICS and of Mercosur. And next year, 2025, Brazil will be home to COP30. So pressure is on from an international perspective. It's time, if there is any ideal time in history, this would be the ideal time for Brazil to show that this is possible. And in my personal view, I think that there is goodwill, there is leadership, there is support. And I think that the setting, although has a lot of challenges, political challenges, but not just that, also financial challenges, the fiscal space or the availability of public resources in order to implement all that is being proposed is very limited. There are challenges of various natures that can affect the results. But I think that this is the precise moment in which there should be more solidarity, I would say, with the efforts that Brazil is trying to do, not only at home, but also with the international community to build this agenda also on an international level.
Okay, Camila, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, maybe to your personal capacity. Yeah, I mean, so Mara asked about political barriers, and you kind of ended on this question of fiscal space. The thing you said earlier in your presentation, which I completely which I completely agree with, is that the one-word answer is investment. And really, to create a big push, to have like a phase shift in the economy, you have to have investment. Otherwise, there's nothing to coordinate. I mean, what are the options? It seems that, from what I can tell from abroad, not following as closely as you, different strategies are in place to try to mobilize more private investment. A country like Brazil doesn't have the same options as a country like the US, which can kind of open the tap and spend almost at will. Like, if the fundamental framework is investment, what are the opportunities or barriers to mobilizing the necessary resources? Does this require conversations about a stronger Mercosur, multilateral development banks? Is it about basically forced savings with higher taxes on upper income Brazilians? What is the source of the kind of investment levels you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. This is a very core question, Daniel, and it's, if you allow me, I will answer not just bear in mind the case of Brazil, but Latin America and the Caribbean in general. There is, we call this at CEPAL the development distress. This is a circumstance that Latin American and Caribbean countries are facing at an unprecedented scale in recent years. And it's a circumstance that refers to the fact that countries have become more indebted, especially to address pandemic impacts. Not so much Brazil. Brazil has a different structure, but for most of other Latin American and Caribbean countries, this is very true. This means that these countries have increased their debts at such a significant level that the amount that they need to pay for debt servicing, for interest rates, have been taking the space of the resources that would be available for policies. And what is more severe is that in most Latin American and Caribbean countries, the factor of adjustment has been public investments. So it is essential when we bear in mind the development distress, which really translates into a trade-off between the countries face having to decide whether to pay that service or carrying forward their development goals and agenda. We have to bear in mind this situation. So we have been contending from CEPAL that and this is again vital debate in the G20 arena, that restructuring is fundamental. We need to be discussing that restructuring so that we can alleviate some of that debt servicing resources so that it can increase the fiscal space for public investments, social policies, and others. As part of the Brazil G20 presidency, one of the strong proposals, you might be seeing that in the media, just last year, Minister Haddad was in DC presenting the proposal of taxing the super rich. This is one of the ways that the Brazilian Ministry of Finance or the Brazilian presidency under the G20 understands that the fiscal space can be created to advance the other agendas that are being put forward within the G20. And this is really critical because different from other sources of income, the large income is not very well defined in terms of taxes. It's types of incomes that are not clearly classified in terms of tax recollection. So it's a proposal of including a 0.5% tax on the wealth of the super rich. So it's really about taxing the wealth because it's not possible to calculate, to estimate, or to monitor the income. So these are a few of the necessary adjustments that or transformations in the international financial architecture that are necessary at an international level. So there is a lot that can be done and should be done at the international level to achieve this transformational agenda. And of course, as you mentioned, Daniel, we will have to be discussing also private investments. It will not be possible for the public sector alone to be mobilizing the scale of the investments that we're talking about. And here we defend or we sustain the idea of smart public investments to identify those sectors that unlock private investments in the sense that sectors that are high risk or high uncertainty. And once there are investments in this sector, they unlock or they crowd in investments from the private sector. And we know from the evidence we've been collecting that these sectors are essentially infrastructure. So transport infrastructure, sustainable mobility infrastructure, collective transportation, metro, energy infrastructure as well is one of the typical sectors in which public investments can crowd in or unlock private investments as well. So there is a lot to be done. It will not be an easy task. We are very much aware. And of course, it's not straightforward also in political terms. But of course, the benefits that are expected at the end of this process certainly or surely overcome the challenges that are in front of us.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Camila, thank you for being here. Really informative. I honestly didn't know anything at all before this, and I'm still trying to make sense of this all as you speak, but kind of bouncing off Daniel's question about investments. I'm taking a class in market regulation, right? So that's kind of made me think about, the regulation of everything, right? And in this, we talk about investments and how we need to restructure the public structures in order to allow for private investments. I guess my question is, we allow for private investment in this to make this possible, but how do we regulate it so as to the private sector then becomes has autonomy or authority over all this, right? And then the public sector, public government isn't able to influence and achieve its goals. Is there any restrictions or regulations to have this balance?
That was a great question.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I think I disconnected. Would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, so we talked about investments and how about it's necessary to essentially restructure public institutions in order to allow for private investments, given that private investments is also going to be really important in order to achieve these climate initiative. And so my question is, how do you balance, the control and say that the private sector has in all this without, so to speak, scaring off investors from, having a stake in this? And you mentioned patents, and that was something that caught my attention as well, that Brazil has a low percentage of patents, right? And that's another thing, like what an overcrowding of, I guess, private patents, for lack of better words, end up being detrimental to the climate initiatives and goals that we need to reach in order to have a sustainable future.
Mhm. Very good questions again. So let me try to tap on a few points that I think can help clarify. And I think that from the outset, I have to say that this agenda is relatively new. We are still learning from it, and we're gonna have to learn as we implement it, as we will not have time to test and pilot these ideas. So I hope that you can all feel inspired at Berkeley to study and also provide evidence that can help us in this task. So, and the point I want to start with is historic conception or a historic conceptual approach that we have at CEPAL. So traditionally throughout CEPAL's economic thinking, CEPAL has put forward the idea of productive inclusion. Although CEPAL recognizes and stimulates and promotes the need of social policies, it is fundamental from a long-term structural perspective to think about productive inclusion. So what does that mean? That means that the economic structure needs to be built in a way that it can create more jobs so that people can be lifted out of poverty, not just with support from the state, with welfare policies, but also in terms of a productive structure that is capable to accommodate more employees, more workers. And the reason why I'm saying this is, again, trying to link the idea that the green agenda is not necessarily a development agenda. So in the example that I was saying, if we imagine a scenario in which this transition happens tomorrow, the truth is that the scenario does not look very good for developing and peripheral economies such as Brazil. These countries are likely to see themselves, at the one hand, more indebted in order to invest. So even when we think about green bonds, SDG bonds, and other sustainability-linked bonds, when we think about those green types of debts, these are, in essence, debts in foreign currency. So that in itself means increasing the external vulnerability of peripheral economies, but not just that, we would be transferring elsewhere the creation and the productive inclusion opportunity that these investments would entail. So it's really at the core, and the formal term is structural heterogeneity. At the core of our understanding in modern or current times of just transition is the idea of productive inclusion. And it is in that sense also that the productive or the private sector is fundamental. We will need to strengthen the productive tissue in Latin America and Caribbean countries in order to have the capacity to generate at least part of these green technologies, of green solutions that will be object of these investments. So perhaps we could also relate this idea to what Mariana Mazzucato proposes currently. It's not about public or private, it's about how to better work together. It's about how each of these stakeholders can do what they do, the private sector being competitive, being seeking profits and seeking to increase their presence even in foreign markets. And it's about the state ensuring that policies are in place to translate those economic profits also in terms of jobs and to ensure gender equality policies and so on and so forth. So in my perspective, it's really about coordination of those different actors and not about competition, right? I think we really need to understand that we will need to work together in this transformation. And there are various ways that this can happen. The state can have a role in reducing the risks for the private sector to invest, for instance, by providing subsidized loans, by giving grants for the scientific sector to do more climate-related R&D. There are various ways in which the state can foster more funding and more presence of the private sector. So I hope I didn't confuse more the idea, but this is what we have been trying to understand better. And I think that when you ask about what is the share of each one, we don't have that answer. And I think that the answer will be built as we go, as we implement these policies and as we see sector by sector, country by country, what the roles will be of these different stakeholders.
Okay, Camila, thank you so much. I think we will call it here. Oh, Jean, you have a question? Oh, great. Sorry.
We have till 1:30.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah. This has all been super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I guess I'm just personally curious if you could just talk a little bit more about, what you mean by technical progress when you're talking about industrial policy. Like, is this investment specifically like, environmental, like clean technologies? But I also remember there was like one element of this like digital technologies. I'm just curious if you could talk more about what that means. And I guess the second part to my question too is, I guess like what are some ways you might, or like the commission might sort of try to address or remedy like potential inequalities that might also come from technical development, if that intersects at all with your work?
I missed the second part. The first one was about technical progress, and the first?
Yeah, and the second is just like, how your work might intersect with like addressing like inequalities that we know also come from digital technologies as well. So that was.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this term technical progress is quite an old one. You will see them in the CEPAL is 75 years old. And this idea, or this term of technical progress was one of the founding concepts of CEPAL. By technical progress, we mean technological development. And this question is really fundamental when we think about the decarbonization agenda. Me personally, I don't like the dichotomy that usually is done by looking at green sectors on the one hand and brown or gray sectors on the other hand. If we take seriously the recommendations in the IPCC reports, if we take seriously the scientific evidence of what we need to do, we are really talking about technical progress or technological sophistication development in every single sector. The IPCC is very clear in saying that all economic sectors will need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in effect, when we think that the challenge is to achieve net decarbonization, this means that we will have to be on the least or in the lowest emission levels as possible. And this means that every single sectors will have to reduce their own emissions. And those emissions that cannot be reduced, we will have to capture and store them somehow. So what do we mean by technical progress within the context of the big push for sustainability? We mean, on the one hand, technologies that decarbonize sectors. So the notebooks on your tables, they are as least carbon intensive as they can be. But we are also talking about technical progress in the sense, so in terms of process, in terms of production processes that are least carbon intensive as they can be. And we are talking about technological progress also in terms of products, of devising new green materials, biodegradable materials, materials that are based on carbon that you can capture and store them in the materials themselves, green chemistry. We are also talking about not just green processes, but green products as well. So this is what we mean when we say technical progress. And if I may add, this is also where we see an opportunity for Brazil and for Latin American countries. Let me illustrate this with an example. Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina are responsible for 60% of world's lithium reserves. Brazil is among the top 5 producers in the world of buses. And what we see currently is that there is a sharp, almost vertical increase in demand of electric buses in Latin America and the Caribbean. But almost the totality of these electric buses are coming from abroad. This means that we are not being able to present the technical progress in the sense of translating the potential that the lithium reserves present, the productive potential that the automotive industry of the buses in Brazil presents, to provide those solutions to the region. Electric buses might be one of the clearest opportunities for Latin American and Caribbean countries to invest in an area that can close 3 gaps at the same time. So by technical progress and technological development, we really mean in the mining sector, from the perspective of process, to be able to extract those minerals in the most sustainable way as possible, with the lowest environmental impact as possible. We also talk about, when we think about process, the circular economy. How can we recover these minerals later on so that we don't have to do further mining, further extraction? We are talking about investments in the automotive industry so that the manufacturing sector is prepared to produce not just diesel buses as it does currently, but also electric buses. And we are talking about the value chain throughout, from mining to the bus, the electric combustion, the electric engine, the batteries. What are the components that could be produced in the region? And with that example, I also want to illustrate what we mean by productive inclusion. If we do not do that, if we not devise a productive development policy, looking at the value chain, looking at what can be produced in the region, we will see the current pattern reproducing itself. We will see the region importing full electric buses. And this means that the jobs that would be created in the region will not be created in the region. And this is also a missed opportunity in terms of inequality, because the productive inclusion, the jobs that would be created in this value chain, and I have to say here that there has been a renaissance, a rebirth of industrial policy debate, even because of this, because we know that it is in the manufacturing sector, it is in the technologically intensive sector where we find the formal, better paid jobs. So investing in technical progress, in technological development, in productive development, in the sense that I am saying, is also core to productive inclusion, to creating those jobs that are good pay, that are highly productive, and are also closely associated with better external insertion in global value chains. So I hope I have explained myself, but please let me know if this is not clear.
Great. Okay, Camila, thank you so much for this presentation. This has been really great, super interesting and innovative thinking, and then we've had a really nice discussion. So we'll be in touch. The recording will go up soon. And in the meantime, sending you the best of luck for the battles in Brasilia, and we'll be supporting you from here.
Amazing. It was a pleasure. And if you have any further questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camila. Bye.
Bye.